Well, it's really great that you're all here. Justworks and Angel City have a great partnership, and so it's just really great to be out here to be together. But I'll kick off the conversation kind of asking a question that I'm sure you all want to know about, and it's something I've just started to learn about. But I'm really interested in, like, how do you start a sports team? Like, what's the founding story? Like, what's the inspiration, and how does one do this?
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you all for being here. Really excited to host you here at Angel City, and so thrilled to partner with Justworks. It's been a real joy because we come together because we're values aligned, and we both have goals and missions that are much bigger than what it is we do. And I think it makes what we do more valuable and more fun and more meaningful. But yeah, I had absolutely no idea how to start a sports team. I never worked in sports. I actually, didn't think women could work in sports. Just one of those weird things where we say it all the time, if you can't see it, you can't be it, and I never saw it, so I never thought that there was an opportunity or role for me. The origin story of Angel City is really fun. In LA, it turned out that a lot of us in tech and in venture grew up playing basketball. That was our sport. And so a lot of us in tech started to bond over the fact that we played basketball. And we said, you know what, men go golfing, and that's how they network. Why don't we start a basketball league, and that's how we'll network with women? So we started this, what we called Wild Feminists Who Tech Basketball League. And it was, I use the word league loosely because I think it was really just one game a summer. But that's a start, 3v3. And it was going on every summer. I finally was able to join in August of 2019. And there's probably 24 of us. It was great. I mean, there was more of a line for the rosé, like here at the bar, than there was to get on the court, because when you get 30 and 40, you start to lose all control, and it gets dangerous. But at that particular game, Kara Uhrman was there, one of my founding partners, and she just come back from the World Cup, where the U.S. women's national team won 2 times in a row, which has never happened for women. It only happened once before for men, I think, in the 1940s. And she was just saying how absolutely amazing it was. The fans, the excitement, the attention. Nike said how they sold more U.S. women's national team kits in August than any other kit at that time. There was ratings. They broke the ratings. They broke ratings. They broke viewership rules and attendance. And she was so excited about it and was telling us about it. And we were, after the game, Kara pulls me aside and says, and I quote, these are things you don't forget, Natalie Portman and I are thinking about bringing a women's professional soccer team to Los Angeles. Do you want to be a part of it and help? And of course, I responded with, the Natalie Portman? Like the Star Wars Natalie Portman? And she said yes. And I said, okay, well, it's LA, so maybe that's not so weird. And then I said, wait, there's women's professional soccer in the United States. I had no idea the National Women's Soccer League existed. I had no idea all the U.S. women's national team players play in the National Women's Soccer League. I had no idea it was entering its 8th year, or that it was the 3rd iteration of a professional league in the United States. Again, I grew up playing basketball. So I never played soccer. I didn't watch soccer outside of the Olympics and the World Cup. It wasn't even something that I was passionate about. I mean, usually when you start a business, you're really passionate about the idea. And this was something where it was more opportunistic. I was in the right place at the right time. I'd known Kara for 10, 20 years. We both grew up in LA. We crossed paths a lot in business, but never worked directly together, but always had a mutual respect for each other and always wanted to. And for me, it was, I love sports. I'm born and raised in LA. This is about women's sports. How amazing would that be? And right away, in my head, it was like, God, if we could build a women's professional sports team that actually made money, right? That was bigger than a men's team, how we could actually change the narrative. And what was so exciting was, we were thinking about building a women's professional sports team at a moment in time where everybody was actually talking about women. In this case, it was really pay equity, visibility equity, gender equity. You had the U.S. women's national team suing U.S. Soccer for pay equity. You had the Me Too movement that was happening in Hollywood, fighting for equal access and opportunity for women producers and directors and actresses. And it was like this unbelievable moment in time where people were talking about pay equity and gender equity. The U.S. women proved again they are the best in the world. So what better business to start than one that you actually have the absolute best ingredients for, and in a city I love. So, of course, I said yes, having no experience whatsoever in sports. And then I got to work to see, like, what does that actually entail?
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Very cool.
Why don't you share your founding story of Justworks? Because it is unique as well.
Well, I mean, I didn't found Justworks. I founded 2 businesses before, though. And my first business was I was coming out of college, and it was in the late 90s. Netscape had just gone public, and we got our first...
Wait, hold on. Raise your hand if you've ever heard of Netscape.
Okay, thank goodness.
This is actually really impressive.
Yeah.
This is like the best audience I think I've ever had. Okay.
I think it was kind of like right now if you graduate like into this AI world, into the workforce, because no one, when I came out of college, no businesses were, like, most people weren't even using email. That's how old I am.
My business wouldn't allow it.
Yeah.
They blocked email.
But we were using this stuff in college, and so we got our first jobs and said, man, this seems like the Stone Age. And so we had this idea to start a company, and it ended up being the first SaaS business in HR technology. It was named Employease, EASE, and we grew that through the dot-com boom and navigated the dot-com bust, which was very formative, and then built a highly profitable business that in 2006 we sold to ADP, which it's now the largest part of ADP. It's called Workforce Now over there. And the same co-founder did a second business named Euclidean, and it's not, we talk about that. But what happened with Justworks was because of that first chapter I'd had, I was introduced to the founder when about 11 years ago. A company had 20 employees, and we just enjoyed catching up. I had built a similar business, and I was super intrigued by Isaac Oates, the founder who'd grown up at Amazon and built a company, sold it to Etsy, and built out their payments platform. So this wasn't like, it's a pretty interesting guy. And he then, after 6 months of getting to know him, he said, it's just me and this guy, Will Gabrick, who's now at Stripe, who was at Thrive Capital on the board, and they wanted a third board member. And they invited me to be the first independent board member. I was like, well, that's pretty cool. And so I was on the board for 5 years, and then 5 years ago, I got a call from Isaac where he was saying, man, this is getting pretty hard. I want help. And I never thought I could work in someone else's company, but in my second business, it was a different kind of company. It didn't require a lot of people. It was a great business, is a great business. John Alberg still runs that, my co-founder. But I was missing the energy of leading big teams. And I was also missing the meaning that comes from taking care of small businesses, which Justworks is all about. And so 5 years ago, I came inside the company to help run it, and that's kind of what I've been doing since. So listen, I've only been around more traditional startups. You've done traditional startups, but also now you're building a sports franchise, the most amazing one.
Thank you.
Is it kind of the same, or are there real differences between the two?
It's more similar than different. I mean, the product is always different, right? But how do you build a great? What makes a great product, right? What makes you successful? In tech, we'll say product market fit, right? So in sports, what does product market fit mean? It means what is our mission? What is our values? What is our vision? Why is the community going to care about us? Unlike a traditional company, we're judged every weekend on wins and losses, right? And we want you to come back and continue to engage with us, regardless if we win or lose. Regardless if your favorite player, Kristen Press, is playing or if she's injured and she doesn't see the pitch for 270 some odd days, right? And so in order to create that, it's what do you stand for and what do you mean? If you're just a sports team, and we talk about this all the time, Angel City is not just a team in a city. That was never our goal, ever. Because if you think about the impact you can have, you think about the revenue you can derive, you think about the lives you can change, it's limiting, right? I've said I can only be as big as Los Angeles. And with Angel City, we start it the same way every single startup starts. And you and I talked about this. What is your mission? What is your vision? What is your values? What do you stand for? What is your why? Why are people going to care about Angel City? By the way, 2 years before we kick a ball. In fact, a great story. In 2020, we announced Angel City in 2020. We're going to bring a women's professional soccer team to Los Angeles. It was in July. By November, we announced that we were going to play at BMO Stadium, and literally that day, we had the mayor, Eric Garcetti, at our presser announcing it, and the second he got off the stage, he closed LA down with the pandemic. So we all had to go home. So it's 2021, and we're saying, okay, well, we can't do what we would normally do. Go out into the community, tell our story. So what's sort of next? And it really forced us to think about, like, what is our mission? Like, why are we here? Why should it matter? And what we came up with was we want to use sport and entertainment to drive to equity. We recognize that we are building a platform because we have Natalie Portman and we have Eva Longoria and we have Jennifer Gardner. We have the ability to tell our message as broadly and as widely as we possibly can. So if we can build ourselves as a global brand where everyone's paying attention to us, that gives us the biggest opportunity to both derive revenue and then drive impact. And so then the question is, well, what does that mean? And how do we do that? And so what we started was thinking about how do we show up in an authentic way so that, again, our community believes in us, right? We want to be reflective of the community, but we want to show up for the community. And it was this idea of leading with passion and purpose to drive to profitability, building a business where mission and capital can coexist, where we never sacrifice one for the other, and hiring people that believed in that passionately. The story I was going to tell was, when you get it right and you have something to say, it doesn't matter if you didn't kick a ball. So in 2021, we needed people to start to know Angel City was going to come to life because we wanted to start to sell tickets, right? We wanted people to know we existed. We wanted players to actually want to be like, who's this team and why should I listen to them? So we went out to social media agencies to try to hire one because we had a staff, I think at that point, of maybe 6 people. And all of like really big ones, local LA ones, to start to build like, what is our message? What is our platform? How do we tell this story of mission and capital? How do we tell the story of caring about the community, driving for impact, but building a sports team in the sports capital of the world? And 50% of the media companies that we went out to, agencies, said, you don't have a name. Like, you don't have players. You don't have anything. Like, how are we going to market you? Like, there's nothing tangible to talk about. And the funny thing was, because we'd done the work on like what our mission was and what our values were, it's like, we're a women's professional sports team. We're driving to equity. This is the impact we're going to have. This is our impact platform. Yes, we will get to the point that we have a name and players, but that's not why you need to care right now. And by the way, players are going to come and go. And so many people just couldn't get their head around that you could stand for more than just what is on your business card. Angel City, a women's professional soccer team. And we were only able to actually pick the right partner because they understood that you could be bigger than a team. And we led with that.
You know, I think that there's so much there that resonates with me. I mean, being around startups, doing my own things for now like 3 decades, like the foundational decisions that I think we all make in starting these businesses are, they echo throughout eternity. And a lot of times, first-time founders, like, these decisions on who you raise capital from and, you know, who your first employees are, attention to mission, vision, values, I think people don't put enough energy in that, and then you deal with the consequences later. But this marriage of like a business objective and a meaningful mission that is going to improve the world also resonates. You know, at Justworks, you know, the way we look at that is, we're in an industry, you know, we help companies with HR, benefits, payroll. This is a pretty mercenary industry. It's been around for a long time. And when you look at like small businesses, the way I look at it is, you know, we're out there, we're starting these things. It's like the hardest thing in the world to get these things to work. And when they work, you make magic happen because out of thin air, you're creating jobs for people that give meaning to their lives, and that creates a fabric for society. Yet what we've observed is that this industry that I'm in hasn't really paid a lot of attention to small businesses. Everyone's kind of interested in the larger companies. And so Justworks explicitly, you know, exists to change that. And our mission is to help small businesses grow with confidence, and we're a very mission-driven company. But beyond just kind of having that as a mission and talking about that internally and that being motivating to employees, we articulated at the company's founding, so Isaac did, and this is part of what attracted me to spend time with them initially as a board member, was we want to create a world where starting, running, and joining a small business becomes a more accessible option for all. Part of that is for everyone. We want to make it easier to be an entrepreneur, small business owner for everybody. But that statement explicitly acknowledges that like the steepness of that curve is not the same for all communities. Access to capital, access to know-how, is not equally distributed. And anyone that like says we shouldn't talk about that stuff is just like, you know, putting their hands over their eyes. There are structural inequities. And so we do things, we serve over 1,000 nonprofits, we give money back to folks with grants, we give discounted rates to folks from kind of disadvantaged communities. And what this does is, I think it leads to a better business. It certainly creates like a very highly aligned workforce because our team cares so much about this stuff. Like you try to hire an executive who's mercenary, doesn't care about this stuff, the organ rejection is so swift, and so it becomes somewhat self-perpetuating. But anyway, we have that in common. Let's talk a little bit though about high-performing teams, right? So on the field, kind of, you know, with the team that works here to support the bigger team, you've had other businesses as well. What have you learned about like what it takes to drive a team to high performance?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing is the definition of a high-performing team is different based on where you are in the journey of starting a business, right? If it's day one, or it's your first 30, or you're at the, I'm at 100 people, right? A high-performing team takes on a different definition. When we started Angel City, passion for what we were building, again, for the mission, right? That this is bigger than sport, and if we're successful, we will have driven towards pay equity and gender equity, recognizing that will take time. So also understanding that this is not a tomorrow success. This is going to take time. So first and foremost was like passion and alignment for the mission. Second was self-motivation. Like people that are intrinsically driven to be successful, to lead with impact and to drive to profitability, where I could say, hey, go out to every club team in Los Angeles and let's get them to know who we are, and then never follow up, ever. And get on my calendar, here are the places you have to be, which days. Like self-motivated to be successful, to drive themselves, because when you're doing a startup, there's so much you have to do at the same time. So those were two things that I look for, day one. As we move into like even where Angel City is today, where we're north of 75 employees, when we were day one, I would say like we were all in the room together. We were all on one boat, right? We were all rowing together and we were all on one boat. Now there's like 3 boats and we're divided between the 3 boats, right? Because we're bigger. We're still doing the same amount of stuff, but we're bigger and we're trying to become more efficient, we're trying to squeeze out more money, we're trying to save costs, or we're trying to come up with the next big idea that's gonna help us achieve our goals. And so communication and collaboration become really important in a high-performing team. Understanding that you don't need to be in the room and that you can trust those people around you. And so I think that's kind of the secret sauce in building it. It's looking at where you are in your development, where you are in your company's journey, and what needs to be successful, and recognize that the people that are totally self-motivated and give me direction and I'm out and I'm gone actually are so good for the beginning, might be terrible when you get to that 7,500 person organization, because you have to get more buy-in, there's more collaboration, there's more communication, there's more trade-offs, right? There's more people that have an opinion and a say. And so knowing as an individual too, where you're great. I'm a builder. I've learned that. I love operators, they're fantastic. I'm a builder, and I will operate to get to the point where I then can afford to bring in a real operator, right? But I'm a builder, that's what brings me joy, that's what gets me excited, that's when I know, like, I'm in my zone of genius. Cool. And so it's not just knowing how to build a high performance team, but also knowing where to put yourself in that team at what stage of a company.
Definitely, I agree with that. When we talk about high performance, it all begins with how you define it. And I kind of stated how we define it at Justworks. It's all about the customer, all about helping the small business owner. And so then when we're looking at different teams inside Justworks, if we're challenging a leader, say, okay, what does it mean to build the highest performing people team or marketing team or sales team or engineering team? There's always 2 parts of the conversation. One part is like, what is it that we're going to do that's going to change the game for small businesses? How is your team going to contribute to that? Because if what your team's doing doesn't contribute to that, it doesn't matter, because we're defining winning this way. And then the other part is what are we going to do? And the other part is how are we going to be? How are we going to show up? And the challenge statement to our leaders is always, how are you going to build the best people team in our industry? Best people team, we're in New York City, in New York City tech. And what would that take? What would it take so that 5 or 10 years from now, every other high-flying, exciting startup is going to want to find people from your team, because they're going to know that people that grew up at Justworks and you're part of the organization, they did really special things and they built unique talents. And that's kind of how we frame things and how we think about setting the table for performance. Then, of course, there's structural elements around how you manage an organization to goals. But do you have any good stories about early in your career when you totally messed up and that solidified a good principle about how to do or not to do this stuff?
So prior to Angel City, I was the founder and CEO of a company called Uhrman, which was an Android-based video game console. So think of PlayStation, Xbox, Nintendo, but bringing the Android ecosystem of mobile games to the television, optimized for a controller and the TV. This is before the Fire TV. This is before games were put on Apple TV. It was a beautiful, small $99 box that really democratized the television. And again, I knew a lot about gaming. I knew nothing about hardware and building physical products. And the idea of Uhrman is also sort of complex, because we need to build a game ecosystem, a storefront, an SDK for the controllers, and we had to build hardware. And so as a first-time CEO, I'm going up Sand Hill Road trying to raise money. Want to start with $15 million. I have no idea what that would have done. Like, it's not enough money to build anything, but we start there. Get tons of no's, you bring it down to 8 million. Tons of no's, you bring it down to 5 million. Tons of no's, you bring it down to 1.5 million. We just want to build a prototype. By the way, I could take an Amazon Fire tablet and be like, this is literally what it is, but it's going to be pretty, but couldn't say that because then what's my value? Anyway, so because it had an HDMI cable and had Bluetooth, like it had a lot of the guts of what we were building. So anyway, we go from 15 million in a matter of like 3 months down to 1.5 million, and everybody's saying no because they're really scared by the hardware. My favorite question at the time was, well, what if Apple or Google or Amazon want to build a box? Like, what are you going to do? I was like, I don't know. What if there's an earthquake tomorrow? Like, I don't live my life waiting for it to be an earthquake. Like, I built what I think the world wants and needs, and we'll add value, and we'll go from there. We got, again, similar to the Angel City story, we got 100 no's before we got our first yes from Eva Longoria. And the lesson there was find someone who's passionate about what you're building. Don't try to sell something to somebody that doesn't care about women's sports, doesn't care about football, doesn't care about sports, right? And so with Ouya, back in 2015, at the time there was a platform called Kickstarter, crowdfunding. It was the beginning of Kickstarter. It might have been its third year, but it just broke $1 million for one project with Pebble, which was an Android-based watch. And halfway through our fundraising, I'm like, no, we're not going to go to Kickstarter. Like, our idea will be out there. Someone will steal it. Like, this is ours, right? Of course, by the time it got to all of the no's, and Pebble was so successful, it was also kind of, again, an aha moment. Here's a platform where people have spent $1 million on a watch that's based on Android. So that means there's people that love Android on the platform. There's people that love technology that's on the platform. The watch could play games. So, like, that's an audience that might be interested in Ouya. And so within 30 days, we put up our campaign. This is before it was like super professionalized, with the goal of raising $1 million. The pitch was it's the most that anybody's ever asked for, and we had this great sort of board of people, like the founder of Microsoft and people that, and some developers that, like, it was really like, if you build it, we will come. I was like, that's good. That's all I need. So we put it up for $1 million. We did an exceptional job with press, making sure people knew that this project was going to be there, which is also something I took to Angel City. And we hit go. And it was 6 a.m. in the morning. I just remember it so vividly. And I left Kickstarter, and I go to email, and I'm emailing everybody I know. Checked out my, share it, donate, whatever you want. We ended up raising $1 million in 8 hours, $2 million in the first day. And by the end of the campaign, we raised $8.6 million. And all the people that said no, all the VCs said, I'm in, what would it take? We ended up raising money from Kleiner Perkins and others because we proved that product market fit. And so, the lesson learned, that's the story for the lesson learned.
I was going to say, I was like asking about
good.
Tough lessons learned. You're talking about raising $8 million in 8 hours. I'm like, whoa, that's the worst you've done.
Right, but here's a lesson learned, and we face it every single day, and we say it all the time. I hire people smarter than me, right? We say that all the time. I hire people smarter than me. The challenge that I ran into is, so we were super successful on Kickstarter. We got all this VC money, and Walmart calls, and Best Buy calls, and Target calls, and Costco calls, and Game and the UK calls, and they all want the products. It's a $99 game box. And here I am, I'm like, oh my God, this is unbelievable, right? This is incredible. What do we do? And at the same time, it's like, well, we're going to launch it on our own website, and we're going to launch it on Amazon. And if I launch it on my own website, I get my money immediately. If I launch it on Amazon, I can get my money in, depending, 15 days, 30 days, 60 days. If I launch it through, these big box retailers, it could take 90 days. It could take 120 days to get your money because just of how the process works. And I hired a head of, this is the longest story. I hired a head of retail who came from gaming, who sold video games and consoles, knew all of the distributors, had the best relationships, like hired the guy, right? And he's amazing. And I said, what do we do? Like, we've got this like cash flow decision to make, but we also have like Walmart and Target, like this will like take us to the moon. And he goes, if you say no to them, they will never come back. And my co-founder and I were a little nervous because, again, we're just like, this is a big decision. By the way, you can't go into a Walmart. You can't go into Walmarts just in California. You have to go into all of them, right? So just think about how much money we actually have to build enough product and then replen. And he's like, Julie, if you say no and you go on Amazon, and they all hate Amazon, they won't be back. And so we made the decision to go all. And yes, it was great from a sales perspective, but it was brutal from a cash flow perspective, and it accelerated massive fundraising, it accelerated massive venture debt, and it eventually probably accelerated us selling Angel City, selling Ouya to Razer, which is the largest gaming peripheral company in gaming. And I always wonder, like, if we didn't do what the experts said. And like the challenge there was my gut was saying one thing. I have no experience in retail sales, zero. My gut was saying, let's just do Amazon and our website. And if the product is great, they'll come.
Yeah.
Versus what the expert was saying, like, you get one shot at this. And it was a moment where, you know, and it wasn't, the lesson isn't like, don't trust experts, don't hire people smarter than you. Like, definitely do that. The lesson was, when we got it wrong, right? I couldn't blame this individual because this was his experience and this was his knowledge. And I'd much rather be wrong and blame myself than be wrong and can't do anything about it. And so it was an interesting lesson of really like trusting my gut, sometimes over experts. And I can't tell you the number of times that came to fruition in Angel City, where it was like, you can't charge, what? You can't charge $50,000 for a suite. You can't charge $1,000 for a suite. How much? You can't charge 100, what? 100,000? Can't charge $100,000 for a suite. You can't sell out a stadium, right? Like the number of times we heard you can't do this with Angel City because it'd never been done in sports or wasn't successful in men's or nobody believed in women's sports. The number of times we heard we can't, was countless. And we're here today because we never listened to one of them.
Yeah. You know, it's like Steve Jobs says, right? It's like, I think before, obviously before he passed, but near his end, he said he's increasingly convinced that what separates successful and unsuccessful entrepreneurs is just they don't give up. So that's I've got all kinds of lessons. I don't think any of them rival that, but when I think about like the growing up as a leader, starting a business at a young age, it's a little embarrassing when I think about how I started out, because wasn't intentional. And I thought being a good manager was just always being there for my people, the team. So if I got an email, respond within 30 minutes, go on a sales call, help close the deal, always being there for folks. I thought that's what great management was. And the problem was, as the business grew, and I took no time off for years because I had to be everywhere all the time, I eventually hit a point where I was breaking into pieces. And I eventually took 2 weeks off. And the embarrassing thing was I took 2 weeks off, and when I came back to the company, I realized not only did nothing fall apart, but everyone probably grew more in those 2 weeks than at any prior period of the company, because they had to complete their own sentences and they had to figure stuff out. And it was like a little embarrassing to realize it, but it kind of stuck with me. And certainly as a leader, there's times that you got to be super present, for sure. But there's sometimes the best thing to do as a leader is just to disappear and let your team struggle a little bit. And sure, like in the moment you might have been able to help them, but if you want to build a company where people are going to grow, you got to let go a little bit. And that was a really big lesson for me.
When we prepped for this, you talked about feedback as a leader. You want to share that? Because I took a lot from that conversation.
Yeah, sure. I mean, the other thing that was hard for me when I was earlier in my career was, I'm a pretty high empathy leader. I certainly build a lot of loyalty to folks who have done things at our company. And you go through these stages, and people would do a lot of amazing things, and then the business would evolve, and the way that they were performing wasn't what the company needed. We needed something new. And I had a really hard time giving feedback to folks, tough feedback. And I would hold it in. And there were always consequences to that. And the consequence, the most unfortunate consequence, that people weren't getting the information they needed to grow. And so after dealing with the consequence of that earlier in my career, I eventually learned how to just give real-time feedback all the time. The good, the bad, and the ugly, always. And when I was given feedback constantly, it took like the heat out of it, because people just expected it. After every meeting, after every pitch we would do, or like some leader would have some initiative, like we would talk about what went well, what could go better. And that like helped people grow. It took the stress off. Like I would carry this stuff around, and then finally it would like come out like in an unintentional way. That was like a terrible way to be a leader. So anyway, like these things all been forged through embarrassing mistakes and so on. But over time, that has like been something I would always coach people on. It's kind of like trusting your gut. If you're going to make the mistake, like you want to know that you're the one that makes it. Well, as a leader, you need to be constantly setting the tone around this is what great looks like. Hey, that fell short of what great looks like, but let's talk about how we can make it better next time, or no one's going to do that. So anyway, that was that story.
Yeah, I would say something I was thinking about when you were saying that is I think one of the loneliest jobs is being a founder. It's really hard. You take on everything. You take on the emotion. You take on, you're accountable. Like, to your point, you start a small business and you're providing jobs for everyone, but like, okay, now I've provided these jobs for people, right? And it's hard emotionally. And I think as a founder, what I found was because it was so lonely, trying to find someone to talk to.
Yeah.
That is not your sister or brother. That is not your wife or husband or partner. That is not somebody that where they hear you complaining all the time. I was running Ouya for probably a year and a half before I found a fellow CEO that also was a startup that's kind of going through what I can, so that I could call at any time and say, have you experienced this, or just bitch or whine and not be judged, and have someone that really knows what you're going through. And so I think that made me a better leader too, because it allowed me to dump away.
Yeah.
Dump away from the company, so I'm not telling and especially if you're the CEO, if you complain internally, it's people that report up to you, right? And finding that confident, whether it's an executive coach or a partner or someone that has a similar role of you, where they know what you're going through and you can talk and share things, it makes it a lot less lonely. And I think it allows you to deal with the highs and lows, because they have a perspective that you don't have. And they have experiences that they could share that could make you feel better about what you're going through at that moment in time.
Yeah, I found my crew in the midst of the dot-com bust. Everything was falling apart. The first 3 years of that first business, the dot-com boom took hold. Capital was easy. Customers were easy. They were growing. We were on the covers of magazines. We felt amazing. And then the dot-com bust happened, and it was really scary. No capital was available. Everybody was, laying folks off. I was in my 20s. I had no perspective, and I didn't feel like I could talk to my co-founder because he was carrying the same stress. I didn't want to put my stress on him, and couldn't talk to my investors, because to our investors we had to hey, we're going to figure all this out.
Everything's great.
But I found a group of entrepreneurs that we still spend time together. 25 years later. It began with once a month getting together and talking through things, and then we became friends and started going on trips together. But that group, it's been fascinating to stay together, because we've all had successes and challenges and exits, but to have a group of folks that you can be vulnerable with, who all know your patterns a little bit, hey, you've been talking about this for a while, Julie, maybe you should, it's good to have people who can say those things. But the one thing I would just build on that, one of the other lessons I learned that took me way too long to realize is the energy as a founder or as a leader that you carry, it gets reflected right back at you. And I was ignorant to this for years, but when I would walk through the office and I would feel anxious, and if I would show that, the whole company would be anxious. And if I was excited and optimistic, and I'm exuding that energy, the whole company would generally be excited and optimistic. And once I began to realize that, what comes with that, once you appreciate that effect, the cause and effect, is a real responsibility to be intentional with your energy. Because if you're going to be a leader and you want to manifest something, and you have this power, but you got to be thoughtful about how you use it. And that was a big thing for me to grow up, because I think I was very reactive a lot of times, and not very intentional. And over time, that learning how to be calm, the calmest person in the room, learning how, when I was feeling emotion, to use it intentionally to an end, that was very important.
I think I'm just loud. That's my team.
Yeah.
Yeah, by far. By far.
We balance each other out.
Yeah.
It's a great partnership.
Should we do some questions?
Yeah.
Yeah, let's get to
Q&A.
questions. Anybody have any questions for Mike and Julie? Oh,
Cool.
Thank you both. That was fantastic. My name is Madeline. Julie, you mentioned you're a product person, and I'm really curious because I hear a dialogue that as a product, women's sports is a version of men's sports that's smaller and cheaper, and I don't believe that to be true. And I'm curious how you've experienced that. How is ACFC, how is women's sports a different product than we might think in the men's sports analogy?
Yeah. You missed shrink wrapped in pink. That finalizes it. It's funny. A lot of people, I've heard that narrative a lot as we are not that, we are this. And I find it funny that they say that, because I don't know. You guys, this is my team. I don't actually believe people believe that. I think people just didn't care about women's sports. Like, it wasn't smaller or worse or less than. It's just like they didn't care. There was no space for it, right? It was sort of written off. It's not as good as men's, so therefore, like, I don't care. They didn't even have to go down the rest of all of sort of that narrative. The reality is, women's sports is great, and it's always been great. The problem is we've never gotten our time. We've never gotten our due, right? So in 2019, when we started Angel City, 3% of all media coverage was about women's sports. So, like, how can you prove that people care about something if they can't even see it? And then when they have the opportunity to see it, when women are winning more gold medals than men at the Olympics, when the U.S. women's national team is winning back-to-back World Cups, and the U.S. men's team can't get out of the team rotations, right? When you have, like, global icons, individuals that have transcended the sport, like a Megan Rapinoe and an Alex Morgan and a Julie Foudy and a Mia Hamm, when you actually have real data points that say, actually, this is legit, but then the powers that be say no and give you only 3% media coverage, like, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. We are so much better today it is kind of amazing. Sitting here today, about 15% of all media coverage is for women's sports. 9% of all sponsorship revenue goes to women's sports. 10% of all merch sales goes to women's sports. Like, that's kind of fantastic, but we still have a long way to go. Deloitte just put out a report that said women's sports revenue is going to garner more than $2.35 billion this year. Unbelievable. Caveat. Men's sports, wait for it, $410 billion.
Wow.
Right? So there's still, like, a huge difference. However, $2.3 billion isn't nothing. It's a real business. Angel City is valued at $250 million because we have this incredible team that actually values the product on the pitch. From a sponsorship perspective, from a ticketing perspective, from an experience perspective, we have built something that, when Natalie, Karen, and I got together, my co-founders, and we talked about building Angel City, when we said, like, what do we want to build? It was so simple. We said, we want to build an experience that we want to go to. It was as simple as that. It has to be affordable. It has to be family friendly. It has to be, geographically desirable. It has to be at the right time. It has to have name band players. No. We want to go to something that we want to attend. And what do we attend? If you're Natalie, it's Dior openings and red carpets, right? But if it's Kara and I, she's going to the U.S. Women's National Team games in Paris. Like, I attend USC football games. I've been to Super Bowls. I've been to SEC basketball tournaments and the Final Four. It's like, these are events that I want to go to, so how can we create Angel City to be an event that we want to go to? And then it was like, we're going to create a spectacle, and we're going to create a FOMO experience. And we talk about how we wanted to recreate the Showtime era of the 1980s Lakers, when you were going to see either Magic Johnson play or to see who Jack Nicholson brought courtside. We have 100 owners. Half of them are, celebrities and athletes. And so we knew we had the ability to create, we knew we had the ingredients to create something great, and we did not let other people's limitations of what they perceived to be women's sports to limit us in what we wanted to build.
I worked in gaming for a long time, so I remember the Ouya story. I feel like it'd be a great...
Affectionately, positively.
I remember the Kickstarter. I think it'd be a great Netflix documentary, though I feel like I just watched it.
Oh.
So, yeah. I have a question for both of you. So teams focus a lot on their competition, their competitors, and LA is such a difficult sports town. You go to a Chargers-Rams game, it's all the away team. It's like a Lakers-Dodgers city. So who are your competitors, and who are your competitors? Is it QuickBooks? Is it ADP? How often do you talk to your teams about your competitors, and how much do you focus on them?
Well, I mean, we're in an industry, ADP's been around for 85 years. So you got, ADP, Paychex, you got, companies like TriNet and Insperity that are lesser known. There's some other new companies that we compete with. So there's a lot of competitors, but I try not to talk much about competitors. I try to talk about customers and the specific customers that we think we have real fit for, and how we're going to delight them and keep raising the bar on what they can expect from our industry. And believing that if we do that, it doesn't really matter what our competitors are going to do. We're going to be just laser focused, and we're going to be the best for a subset of the market, and that's going to lead to a great outcome for everybody. Our customers will be happy, our investors will be happy, our people are going to have a chance to grow because we're going to be growing, and so that's what we focus on.
Yeah, it's funny, we're similar. Well, first of all, I mean, when we started Angel City, there's nobody in women's sports we wanted to emulate. right? So that was sort of off the table. And then when you come to LA, every sport is different. Like if you're a baseball fan, and we've learned this, like if you're a baseball fan, doesn't necessarily mean you're a soccer fan. Just because you're a sports fan doesn't mean you're gonna be a fan of all of them. We just were hyper-focused on what are we? Like, why care about Angel City? How are we gonna show up and what we're gonna build? We want to create the FOMO experience. We want you to come to an Angel City match no matter what. And we recognize that, yes, there are 11 professional sports teams in LA. There's the beach, there's the mountains, right? There's also like 13 million people here. There literally is something for everyone. This is a diverse community where people, find their passions and want to support it. And we just believe that if we told our story well enough, we built something with passion and purpose, we gave back to the community and they knew it, we would find our people. And our first year at Angel City, we had we had two very big goals as it relates to selling tickets, because again, nobody comes to sporting events. You can't get more than a couple thousand people in a women's game. We wanted to sell out our home opener, which we did, which was amazing. Best day of my life. But after my kids, that's a given. Then my kids being born, then Angel City. But we were like, we're going to sell out half our games. We're going to sell out 6 games, and we called it. We called our shot. Our home opener, Pride, a rivalry game with San Diego, the final game of the year. We called our shot of what we wanted to. And in the middle of July, we had a game against the Seattle Reign. Nothing special, game in the middle of the year. Now, Seattle Reign did have Megan Rapinoe, and everybody wanted to see Megan Rapinoe. They thought it might be her last year, so there was a lot of excitement for Megan. Leading up to the game, we found out that Megan was injured. She was probably not going to play, which we tried to tone down because we wanted to keep selling tickets. And the game comes, and it is a surprised us, sold-out game, which is obviously amazing and exciting. However, the point of the story is, at the exact same time, at the Rose Bowl in Pasadena that has seats 90,000, there was a friendly match between 2 amazing men's teams. I think it was like Inter Milan and Real Madrid. It was a sold-out game. So there were 90,000 fans seeing incredible men's football at the Rose Bowl, and there were 22,000 fans seeing incredible football for Angel City. And it just showed that, we achieved our goal of finding our audience and aligning our values, and they came to us regardless. I mean, if you're a football fan, you're going to that match, but they didn't. And so I think we did that because we focused on ourselves.
Yeah. Throwing back to when you went on or didn't follow your instinct and then went back and followed your instinct. As a founder, I really struggle with instinct versus intellect. And specifically, to be vulnerable for a minute, like intellect meaning self-worth. Like I'm worried that my ego's getting, like, what's smart? Like, I guess that's the question. Like, what's smart versus, like, I have a visionary gut feeling. And I'm still in the stage where I don't know which one it is. Is it, like, smart, or is it I need to really follow my gut feeling? What kind of guidance can you give us about how to make decisions when we're trying to decide where it's coming from?
I mean, I'd love to hear Mike's answer first, but you go next. I am incredibly collaborative when it comes to talking through things, right? Like, at the end of the day, the buck stops with you and you have to make the final decision, but I wouldn't do that without talking to the people that I trust to get their opinion, to vet it on both ways. And then, you just have to go with what you feel is the best. And just look, you're not always going to be right. You're like, the irony about, like, really successful founders is that they learn more from, you say this all the time, but it's true. You learn more from your failures than your successes, because when you're successful, you don't always know why. And luck plays such a massive, if I wasn't at that basketball game on August 19th, 2019, I don't actually know that I would be here. I mean, that was lucky, right? The work was developing a relationship with Kara for over 20 years. Like, it finally happened. And so you don't always know why you're successful, but you always know why you failed. You always know what that decision was, and you have to learn. And you have to make those decisions so that you can have those learnings. But in that case, what I would do is I talk to everybody, get all of their opinions, and then I make the call. And then you just have to sort of ride the wave of it.
As I kind of had success and I got to meet people that have been super successful, what I began to realize is, like, whoa, like, most of these folks I wouldn't necessarily say are smarter than me, yet they've accomplished things that have dwarfed what I've accomplished. And what I took away as more generalizable is that they trusted their gut and they went quickly. And so I think that learning how to trust one's gut and then getting those cycles in of, like, just trusting it, make the decision, decision made is valuable because speed wins.
Yeah.
And then sometimes it won't work out. And then, okay, you take what's left and you make another decision. You just keep moving. I think the biggest error is to overthink and not move. And one of the best bits of advice I got was from Bill Gurley, famous Uber investor. I was his first venture investment, was in our first business, so we kind of grew up together. And he said something, he probably didn't, I'm sure it's been said by others, but it stuck with me when he said, listen, when you're 70% sure, you just go. And I was like, wow, okay, 70% sure, that's like I'm 70% sure about a lot of things, but I've spent a lot of time trying to get to 100% sure. Yeah, you're never going to get there. I was like, oh, okay. So that was really helpful framing for me, and I think it's been great advice because it's like you got to get through these cycles, got to move.
70% sure, let's go.
We're gonna make a T-shirt now. We always want to make T-shirts, so just 70% sure.
Let's
just
go.
works.
Hi,
I always want to make T-shirts.
Sorry. I'm Michelle. I have been following really closely the federal government attacks on DEI and this narrative that DEI equity are counter to business outcomes and high performance. As two leaders of companies who have equity really at the center of your mission, how have you experienced the relationship between those values and performance?
Well, I think like it's pretty, and you can even prove this mathematically, that like having diverse perspectives, you're going to get to better decisions. And so I believe that they're totally aligned with high performance. So I'll just like start with that statement. It is an interesting time that we're in with like, I think things that are like so obviously true being under attack and business leaders feeling pressure not to talk about these things. And it's interesting to see a lot of folks kind of quickly cave and I guess decide that what they said a couple years ago isn't like important to say anymore, and realizing how performative certain things were coming out of George Floyd and so forth. But it's also pretty encouraging to see some other folks that are standing by like their statements and their beliefs that building a diverse workforce is something that they value, that they think is not just the right thing to do, but good for business. We were having a conversation before this panel. One of the things that I aspire to, like, is for Justworks to be successful in a variety of ways. And you imagine the Harvard Business Review article that could be written about your company. And there's a couple I would like written, but one of them is that part of our success came from doing what was right in the world and proving that was good business. And then as that led to more business, it gave us more resources to do more that what's good in the world. And that just compounded. And it's just going to be an interesting time to prove that. And we'll have to be smart about how we kind of message certain things so we don't court trouble. But we're certainly not backing down from what we've always believed in, and I think is obviously true for anyone who's like paying attention.
Yeah, I mean, Angel City is a values-based company, and it's been challenging sometimes to lead our values, especially when, like, it wasn't even the government. There are partnerships and things that we did that not all of our community liked, right? But we did them because we did it through the lens of, does this align with our values? Is there going to be a positive impact? Are we changing something for the better? We're a sports team in LA. We want to be representative of our community. We want to look like our community in the front office, on the executive staff, on the pitch, with their coaches, with the performance staff. We want to be reflective of our community, because if we're reflective of our community, we will be best serving our community. And that's the only lens with which we look through.
Hi, I'm going to continue back on the thread about leadership and intuition versus intellect. So thank you previously to the question. For me, generally speaking, sometimes as being a leader, you're going to go through some unpopular ideas that you have to vet with your team. So going back to that question earlier and the comment that you made, when you have an unpopular idea, I'm assuming that at some point you did have one, but intuitively you felt, right? Intuitively you felt this was the right thing to do, even though it was something that you had to get buy-in from your team. Can you share a little bit about how you went through that process and then what that end result looked like?
So our founding head of community is a woman by the name of Catherine Davila, who's absolutely amazing. And she taught all of us the importance when you disagree or when your values are challenged, that you call people in and you don't call them out. You call them in and you have a conversation. And I use the word educate, not to say that I'm right, but to have that conversation, to explain so that people understand. One of our values at Angel City is not everyone's going to like us, and we're okay with that. And really, like, it's one thing to say that, but it's another thing to be really okay with that. When you lead with your values, you can't satisfy everyone. And like, we want everyone to be happy because we want sold out stadiums, right? We want, everyone wearing our merch, and we know we can't do that. And so having it as one of our values to be okay with that was really important to us. A tangible example is when we talk about building an organization where mission and capital can coexist, we wanted to walk the talk with everything we did. And so we launched this incredibly unique, first of its kind, I think still only of its kind, sponsorship program where 10% of our sponsorship dollars go back into the community. So for every dollar we get, we're putting something back in the community through our impact platform of equity, essentials, and education. And in our first couple of years, we partner with crypto.com. So as many sports teams do, there's a lot of money in those businesses with NFTs and exchanges, and they wanted to partner with us, and we wanted to partner with them, and our community got really upset. NFTs are destroying the environment. It's horrible. How can you, this isn't, you're not values aligned. How can you partner with this organization? And we went down the first path of educating. We're like, actually, proof of stake is different. It's like, your water bottle's worse. None of those arguments ever really work in practicality. But we explained to them why the partnership made sense. And for us, as we want to have a positive impact in the community and we want to really support women, one of the things that we learned when it came to financial instruments is that when new financial instruments are brought to market, women are left behind. So understanding Bitcoin, understanding cryptocurrencies, understanding NFTs, women are left behind. And you know that when something new comes to market, if you're early, you have a greater opportunity to make more money than if you're late. And so with crypto.com, our partnership specifically was to teach financial literacy to women so that they could be able to be part of this ecosystem. And we partner with the Downtown Women's Center and women that were coming back into the workforce, as simple as balancing a checkbook and opening up a savings account. And how do we think about savings? But being able to use this 10%, it's a massive amount of money, to be able to have this impact in the community and teach financial literacy to ultimately get them the position that they could benefit from these new instruments. That is 100% aligned with Angel City's mission and values. So when we explained that, what happened was they understood. So the difference was they didn't support it on social, but they didn't hate us on social either. But they understood it, and they understood our partnership. And that was the difference. So for us, in order to stay true to our values, what we always talk about is how we call you in to have that dialogue so you can understand. And be okay if not everyone is okay at the end, but at least they understand.
Yeah. I mean, you got to be really comfortable with that or else you don't make decisions. And what I've just learned is that, well, one, we want to grow our leaders. And so we want to include people in the process so that they can have a point of view and raise their concerns. So for example, I mean, this is a small one, but it's recent. You're hiring an executive. Well, I like to include a lot of people in meeting potential executives. And it's almost never unanimous to hire someone. But what I'll get is everyone's concerns. Hey, I'm not sure that this person has this particular kind of experience, or I didn't get enough about how they develop people and that they're going to be a great manager. And so I'll take all of the concerns and I will do my diligence. And when I make a decision, I'll come back and say, hey, I decided to or not hire this person. And I understood your concerns, but here's how I got comfortable that concern wasn't disqualifying. And I do that, we have a value, our values are COGIS, so camaraderie, openness, grit, integrity, and simplicity. And as it relates to openness, all our big decisions, we talk the whole company about why, and it's good for the team's growth. It's also good for, if you want to retain high-powered, high potential people, they tend to, I think, being in an environment where they, know they have a voice and they get visibility into decisions. But I think most of the decisions that are made are not unanimous, and we just make them and we communicate the rationale why, and the org moves on. And I think it's a better way to go than to be afraid of things that will be uncomfortable.
We have time for one more question. Anyone?
How do you balance diversity with hiring for a high-performing team? I'll give you a specific scenario. So you're hiring for senior leadership, and you open up the application, you get 30 applicants, but 27 of them are same ethnic, same gender background. but the candidates are overqualified. Some of them are very overqualified. So how do you, what do you ask yourself? Like, like your team needs diversity, but you're not getting it through the application process. How do you balance that?
Well, I mean, you're always looking to hire the best person for the role. And, obviously there's some questions about, well, what defines best, and you can debate that. But I think the most essential thing is to make sure that that slate doesn't end up, you're not done if that's how your applicant pool looks. Like, you just do the work that you have a much more broadly representative group of folks that you're talking to, and then you go through a process and then you hire the best individual. And there are systemic inequities that show up in this. Like as you go to senior executives, the folks of certain backgrounds have had sometimes more experiences, and so some of the applicant pools will be not representative of New York City. They'll be skewed, and that's something that you have to navigate. And as a result, our leadership team doesn't yet represent New York City's diversity. But we go out in every role, we look at diverse pools. We don't just hire from our networks and so on. And we've been intentional about building the diversity of our team. If you look at our board, there's a founder and myself as CEO, and then we have 2 investors that we don't get to choose who they are. They happen to be white guys. But there's 4 independent seats that we get to choose for very specific reasons. And we chose them all because they brought incredible things to our business, not because of their gender or their ethnicity. But it just so happens that of those 4 folks, 3 of them are incredibly high-powered women. One, Chris Leslie, lives out this way. She was the CFO of DreamWorks. She runs our audit committee. Karen McGee was CEO of Planet Out and then became Senior Vice President of Time Warner's Human Resources Group. She runs our comp committee. Emily Chu, who built Cash App at Square, who's a very disruptive product leader, now CEO of a new company. She just kind of pushes us all to be thinking about how we're moving fast enough. And then the 4th independent is a guy named Chuck Berg, who was an executive in the health insurance industry, and that's a very relevant part to our business. And so we chose individuals not because of what they look like or their race, or we chose them because they brought unique experiences. But I think if you just stick to your network, and that network might be pretty narrow, but if you go through a really deliberate process, you can find amazing people that represent the diversity of our country, and you'll build a more interesting company that way.
Thank you, Mike and Julie. Give it up for Mike and Julie over here.